I knew something was off the second Mason Locke smirked and said, "Let's make this memorable," before pulling up the admin console mid-Zoom. We were 30 minutes into the year-end all-hands, and I had just finished running a successful load test the night before that shaved 5 seconds off our multi-tenant latency. 5 seconds that meant everything to our federal contracts. But that didn't matter now. Mason shared his screen, clicked into the admin panel, typed my name, hovered for dramatic effect, and then deleted my entire account, live, while the team watched in awkward silence. Some chuckled. A few gasped. Most looked down at their keyboards, pretending to care about Slack. I didn't say a word. I just muted my mic, stood up from my desk, and walked out of frame. My hands were shaking, not from rage, from the sheer absurdity. 10 years, wiped out by a man whose biggest contribution to the company so far was a Slack emoji bot that suggested mindfulness when systems went down. Before we dive deeper, if this story hits a nerve, if you've ever been blindsided or undervalued, take a second to subscribe and like the video. It helps this team keep telling the stories no one else wants to say out loud. Now, back to it. Arcline Systems wasn't a startup. We weren't playing around with digital lemonade stands. We handled logistics pipelines for real-world supply chains, government contracts, pharmaceutical tracking, raw material flows for military-grade composites, and every byte of it, every license key, heartbeat ping, and renewal script ran through a back-end system I designed, quietly, invisibly, until the hoodie-wearing poster boy for Move Fast and Break Things decided I was legacy overhead. I wasn't glamorous, never cared to be, while the Mason Lockes of the world posted medium essays on visionary disruptions. I wrote credential expiry logic so tight you couldn't brute force your way past it with a crowbar. When we were migrating to containerized stacks in 2018, I built the fallback tunnels myself. No one asked me to. I just knew what failure felt like and coded accordingly. When Arcline got hit with a zero-day exploit in 2021, it was my undocumented isolation protocol that stopped the lateral movement cold. No headlines. No thanks. Just another day patching holes no one saw coming. And I liked it that way. But Mason needed a show. His favorite line in stand-ups was, "We're not in Kansas anymore." Cute. Real original. He used it when sunsetting Jenkins, when replacing Confluence with Notion, and when replacing me on a live call with a guy named Zubair from an outsourcing firm in Dubai who once wrote a Medium post titled, "Why Legacy Devs Fear Me." No hate to Zubair. He didn't know what he was walking into. After I walked out of frame that day, I didn't go cry into a pint of ice cream. I poured a neat bourbon, lit the candle on my work desk for the last time, and watched as Jenkins' job started failing from my read-only Grafana dashboard. TikTok. See, Mason didn't understand the architecture. He didn't understand the way trust was baked into every layer of the system. And I'm not talking about social trust. I mean literal trust assertions, digital certificates, revocation tokens, credentialized handshakes coded by someone who knew that chaos doesn't knock. It detonates. And the detonator was him. The root token, the one Arcline assumed would work for all their restores, hot fixes, and last-minute staging pushes, was never tied to a shared company admin. That would have been reckless. It was bound to my employment hash, buried behind a hash rotation protocol only triggered if my account was disabled. So when Mason played cowboy coder on a live call to show everyone how bold and disruptive he could be, he didn't just delete my email access. He pulled the pin on a very quiet grenade, and it didn't explode all at once. It waited, just long enough for him to think he won. I remember the first time I heard the phrase, modularizing cost centers. I damn near choked on my lukewarm coffee. Mason said it like it was revolutionary, like he'd just discovered fire. What he meant, once you stripped away the TED Talk gloss, was cutting legacy roles, folks like me, and replacing them with cheaper, shinier options who couldn't spell infrastructure without a cloud plugin. He delivered it all with that disarming smirk, the one that said, "Don't take it personally, you're just a rounding error." Said it during a Thursday strategy huddle while pointing at a pie chart labeled over-resourced units. Our box was colored gray. You ever see your life reduced to a dull Excel cell? Try sitting through that slide with people half your age nodding along like it made sense to amputate the brain to make the body lighter. Then came the backhanded praise. Stability, rock-solid foundation, tenure, all wrapped in the same breath as modernization, external optimization, and offshore sync opportunities. He used the word legacy so often you'd think I was a haunted mansion, but I smiled. I nodded. Because if there's one thing you learn managing systems for 9 years, it's how to let fools talk until they hit a wall they built themselves. The first crack came from a DevOps kid named Anya. Sharp. Probably too sharp for what they were paying her. She pinged me on Slack late one Friday. Short and sweet. Hey, can you confirm what gets revoked when your user is disabled? I froze. That wasn't curiosity. That was a trigger check. Someone had asked her to prep an access termination sequence, and I was the hypothetical they were testing it against. Depends, I replied. Which tier of user and which credentials? Most have expiration dates. A few are hard bonded to employment status. She reacted with a thumbs up emoji, then went quiet. But it wasn't the question that got me. It was the phrasing. Your user. Not a user, not someone's credentials. Mine. I stared at my screen, the cursor blinking like a metronome counting down to something ugly. That weekend, I pulled out a laminated sheet from my bottom drawer, my copy of the Access Chain Manifest. I cross-checked every path, every root token, every ephemeral key linked to my employment object. Everything was still clean, still active, still mine, which is exactly why they'd have to come for it. Mason wanted disruption, but he had no idea what disrupting me actually entailed. See, my systems didn't just run, they documented themselves. They encrypted and rolled over based on conditional triggers and buried deep inside Jenkins, Docker, and a few tools he couldn't even name correctly, were job chains with dependencies tied to my employment hash. You disable me without failover? You don't get a pretty crash. You get silence. No errors, just nothing. Still, I didn't panic. I just reread Clause 7.2 of the internal DevSec framework, the one I wrote. Upon revocation of all employment-linked tokens, elevated credential pathways will be subject to irreversible obfuscation. Restoration not supported without active employment validation. I wrote that after a near breach in 2022. Mason had signed off on it personally during the handover. He wouldn't remember, but the system would. That week, I started exporting logs, not to external drives. That would have flagged alerts. I did it inside our audit sandbox, encrypted, partitioned, labeled by date and subsystem, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Insurance in case the walls started to shift. And they were shifting. The cloud ops team had suddenly stopped copying me on Q1 provisioning plans. A couple of automated tasks I usually reviewed came back marked approved by CTO. I checked the change history, and there it was. New workflows linked to someone named Zubair.admin. They'd already begun. I didn't need a war room to see it. Mason was phasing me out, one system at a time, dressing it up as efficiency, modernization, strategic realignment. Whatever buzzword let him gut the engine while smiling for the camera. But here's the thing about systems that run silently for 9 years. You don't replace them with slide decks. You replace them with care, with knowledge, with someone who understands not just the code, but the scars underneath it. And Mason? He had none of that. Just an admin console and a god complex. He was prepping the bullet. He didn't know the gun was pointed at him. December 29th was supposed to be a half day, the kind of corporate limbo where everyone wears hoodies to Zoom, turns off their cameras, and pretends to be productive while waiting for PTO to kick in. I had a checklist to finish, mostly automated redundancy verifications and a quarterly update for our fallback routines, and a peppermint mocha I'd been nursing for an hour. Nothing dramatic, just clean up before year end. Then the all-hands invite popped up. 12 AU sharp. Mandatory. Mason's name on it, of course. Subject line, ArcLine 2025, future forward. I joined the call, camera off, mic muted, just like everyone else. The screen filled with familiar grid faces. Product managers trying to look engaged, front-end devs half-watching with glazed eyes. HR blinking too fast like they'd been briefed to smile through it. Then Mason appeared, wearing that same smug hoodie with the word disrupt printed across the chest like it made him edgy instead of exhausting. Thanks everyone for making time, he started, clicking through title slides with corporate blue gradients and meaningless phrases like Q1 acceleration and vertical scaling synergies. Typical buzzword soup. I sipped my drink, half listening, until slide 5. Title, 2025 Infrastructure Strategy. That's when he said it. And to show our commitment to change, he paused for dramatic effect, flashing a grin that looked practiced in a mirror. We're saying goodbye to legacy overhead. Then he opened a new window, shared his screen. It was the admin console. Someone unmuted with a nervous chuckle. He typed in my handle, Crandall, admin. I sat forward in my chair. The peppermint mocha suddenly tasted metallic. He hovered, smiled, and clicked delete. My camera feed was still off. No one saw my face. No one saw the way my jaw clenched or how my fingers curled under the desk until the wood dug into my palms. I didn't react outwardly, just muted, not that I'd been talking, and stood up slowly, left the screen, let them look at the empty chair. Some people laughed. Most didn't know what they were watching. A few, like Anya from DevOps, looked frozen. Her eyes flicked between the chat and Mason's face like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. My name vanished from the directory in real time. Mason moved on with the slides, pretending it was a quirky stunt. Change is uncomfortable, he quipped, but discomfort is where innovation lives. Someone, I think from marketing, gave him a thumbs up emoji. Slack lit up with confused gifs and passive-aggressive kudos. People love pretending they're okay with injustice, so long as it doesn't affect their access privileges. I didn't log back in. I didn't try to fight it. Why would I? The moment Mason hit delete, he triggered a cascade of events buried so deep in Arcline's architecture, not even their most senior DevSec engineer could unwind them without a blood sacrifice. That root access token Mason assumed he still had. It wasn't static. It wasn't floating in some shared vault like an old-school skeleton key. It was ephemeral, regenerated every 7 days and tethered to a living employment hash. My employment hash. And when he erased me, he didn't just cut off my Slack. He severed the artery that fed heartbeat signals into Jenkins, Docker, Azure fallback tunnels, and about 24 critical service integrations. None of it was immediate. No sirens. No pop-ups. Just a soft exhale from a system that realized its pilot light had gone out. But Mason didn't know that yet. He just went on presenting, proud of himself for being bold, for leading transformation with flair. A few more slides, a company holiday video, and the meeting wrapped. People logged off. I didn't. I sat back down, refreshed the Grafana panel, and watched the first cracks bloom. The Jenkins pipeline stalled at 63% deployment. Then 41% of live monitoring scripts returned null values. The daily redundancy push pinged once, and then nothing. No errors, no access, just absence, like someone turning off a lighthouse before the storm even hits. And Mason? He still thought it was a win. It started with a Slack ping at 2:07 a.m. Dubai time, then another, then 10 more. The offshore deployment team was panicking, and I wasn't even on the company directory anymore. But old alert logs I still had access to in my personal observatory instance were humming with failed attempts. Jenkins hung at 71%, cannot push containers. CI/CD stage rollback failed, authorization denied. Requesting elevated permissions, admin restore non-functional. I sat on my couch in flannel pajamas, barefoot, sipping ginger tea like it was any other night. My cat, Truman, was curled into a judgmental loaf beside me. He twitched every time my old phone buzzed. By 3 a.m., they had escalated all the way up to Mason. He tried logging into the admin dashboard, reset the pipelines, triggered restores. When those didn't work, he opened the platform vault and attempted a manual override using what he thought was the root credential. It failed. Then he tried the God mode, the one credential most companies think gives them omnipotence. But Arcline's version had a catch, because 2 years ago, after a failed penetration test that exposed an exploitable backdoor in the shared admin rotation, I rebuilt it. I didn't publicize the change, I documented it, submitted it through legal, had it countersigned by the previous CTO, then locked behind a policy gate. Clause 7.2. All elevated credentials above Tier 3 shall be bound to employment-based hash keys, revocation of employee record triggers, automated token nullification. Translation: fire me and everything tied to my admin state dies with me. They didn't just delete me, they deleted the keystone. I imagine Mason sitting there, hoodie wrinkled, hair flopping over one eye, typing in strings he didn't understand into terminals he barely used. His DevSec lead, probably still half asleep, on a call trying to explain what ephemeral credentials mean and why rebuilding access isn't like resetting a Facebook password. The dashboard must have looked normal at first. Static charts, no flashing red, but when he tried deploying the January patch set, nothing. Jenkins failed to load the image. Docker containers returned socket timeouts. The fallback tunnel I built for our East Coast data center deployment, sealed, because that tunnel required a second handshake. A key only generated through a job I wrote and a key only my credentials could activate. It wasn't sabotage, it was structure, like removing a heart and wondering why the veins stopped pulsing. The confusion started small. Ticket queues piling up, Slack threads growing longer, more people tagged, more theories proposed. By morning, the internal chatter hit a volume that would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. I still had a friend or two who hadn't turned fully into Mason groupies. One forwarded me a screenshot of a message from the director of Cloud Ops. Can someone find out what Crandall used for master orchestration? There's no current map. No map, because no one had asked for one. Because every time I offered to walk the new hires through it, Mason said it wasn't a priority. He wanted dashboards, not documentation. He wanted bright colors and zero-click solutions. He didn't understand systems. He understood optics. Which is why when the systems failed, the optics got real ugly. By 7:02 a.m., one of the government clients noticed an unusual delay in receiving updates on their shipment tracking system. By 9:12 a.m., the service level agreement breach timer started ticking. Most of them didn't even know that kind of alert existed, until now. I didn't have to lift a finger. Everything I needed to say had already been said, in code, in logic, in policy, written calmly over years of quietly cleaning up messes no one else could see. Mason had no idea how deep he was sinking. All he saw were systems being difficult. But systems aren't difficult. They're just honest. And Mason had just told them I didn't exist. By mid-morning, the panic had spread like a gas leak no one could contain. What started as a mild system freeze turned into a full-blown operational crisis, with people scrambling through logs, calling vendors, and firing off legal escalations that read like badly written horror novels. I could feel it before I heard a word. It was in the air. The silence of a platform choking on its own hubris. Someone in ops pinged DevSec with a question no one wanted to ask. Can we reverse her termination just to reauthorize access? It was the digital equivalent of trying to shove a genie back into the bottle. A bottle Mason had gleefully shattered on a live stream, but the answer came fast. Too late. Because even if they offered to reinstate me, begged me, crawled across hot coals of company protocol, it wouldn't matter. My credentials were dead. And not just expired dead, not just sleeping. They were self-terminated, atomized by a protocol I had designed for one very specific scenario, when someone in power decided to value optics over architecture. I could picture it. Legal, red-eyed, and under-caffeinated, digging through documentation they'd ignored for years, blowing dust off my digital policies until they found the one file that mattered. Credential Isolation Protocol, Auth Level 5, right there in black and white, Clause 7.2. Upon revocation of all associated employment tokens, elevated access paths self-destruct irreversibly. Reactivation of dependent subsystems is not supported without original hash validation or pre-authorized transitional chain. No one had built a transitional chain. Because Mason thought preparation was legacy thinking. I built a kill switch because I lived through the near disaster of 2022. When a rogue contractor accidentally got access to the wrong repo and almost nuked our payment processing system. That mess cost Arcline $1.4 million and 3 government compliance flags. I wasn't going to let that happen again. So I wrote the clause, presented it, had it reviewed by legal and co-signed by the then CTO and the head of DevSec. The irony? Mason signed a reaffirmation memo of that exact clause his first month on the job. No one remembered that now, except the system. And me. What came next was desperation disguised as professionalism. My old inbox, now locked but mirrored on an internal compliance audit system, started lighting up. Subject: urgent credential restoration. Subject: critical platform impact, requesting assistance. Subject: reinstatement options, time sensitive. Someone even floated a workaround. Could we simulate her hash object? But that got shot down in 2 minutes flat, because another clause I'd authored made hash object cloning a red flag infraction under internal audit policy. Then came the call to legal: find the master key. But here's the twist. The master key didn't exist, not in the way they thought. There was no universal skeleton key that could open every door with the right string of characters. There was only a distributed web of keys, each living in isolation, each pulsing with a heartbeat that required validation from my employment status. The system didn't recognize me as fired. It recognized me as gone, like a limb amputated with no hope of regrowth. By noon, a meeting invite hit every executive calendar: credential containment and impact risk, emergency review. I wasn't on that list anymore, but I didn't need to be, because by then, the system wasn't just offline. It was actively erasing dependencies tied to ghost credentials, like muscle memory forgetting how to walk. They didn't need me back. They needed a time machine, and all they had was a man in a hoodie blinking at a terminal that now responded with one word: null. The systems were still down by 3:12 a.m., no heartbeat, no container flow. Jenkins was locked in a restart loop like it had lost its will to live. At first, Mason had brushed it off as a minor hiccup, a brief blip in pipeline health. Those were his exact words in a Slack thread that would later become Exhibit B. But what he didn't know, what no one in his overconfident orbit had bothered to read, was that this wasn't just a technical inconvenience, it was a contractual breach. Arcline had signed an SLA, a real one, with the Department of Infrastructure Logistics. Not a handshake deal or a vendor fluff doc, but a federal compliance agreement tied to multi-million-dollar quarterly installments. And buried deep in that agreement was a clause I had flagged during the original draft. I still remember the conversation with legal when I insisted it needed extra attention. Clause 4.3, I said at the time, needs teeth, so I gave it fangs. Any disruption beyond 8 hours due to internal credential mismanagement shall trigger non-compliance penalties and audit review. And now those 8 hours had passed because of a click, because Mason Locke wanted a grand gesture for the year-end all-hands. I wasn't watching the timer, but someone in compliance definitely was. That's when the real fear started to show. Not in Slack threads, those had gone quiet, but in the calendar. A new invite appeared. Federal SLA breach contingency restricted access. The legal team's calendar went from skeleton to solid in under 5 minutes. DevSec wasn't answering messages anymore. They were on an internal call flagged P0 irreversible credential failure. People stopped joking. One of the few engineers who hadn't outright deleted my number sent me a message from her personal phone. They're trying to reverse engineer the job chaining logic. They can't even find the dependencies. Mason's losing it. No surprise, those job chains weren't linear. They were designed to be resilient, distributed, and self-aware. You couldn't just restore a backup and expect it to work, not without the initiating handshake, not without me. More importantly, those job chains were the compliance proof of performance. They were how Arcline showed the government that we weren't just blowing smoke about uptime, that we had eyes on every byte, every transaction, every route handoff from front-end request to back-end confirmation. That oversight was now dark. And that darkness wasn't just silence. It was money bleeding in the shape of regulatory triggers. I imagined someone in legal pulling up the contract, scrolling with increasing dread until they hit the clause, rereading it, then double-checking the timestamps, Slack logs, admin logs, that fateful Zoom recording. All roads led to one conclusion. They didn't lose access. They revoked it. Deliberately. Publicly. Mason's signature approving the credential architecture back in 2023, still on file. His Slack thumbs up when I explained the employment-bound hash framework, screenshot. The DevSec approval from 6 months ago reaffirming the kill switch fallback protocol. Archived and indexed. This wasn't a bug. It was a choice. A loud, performative choice that now had a $sign attached to every minute of outage. By dawn, the CFO had quietly joined the credential impact call. The term material risk event was floating through the corridors like a ghost no one wanted to see. And me? I sat in my kitchen, watching the sun rise through half-closed blinds, eating a toasted bagel with honey butter. calm, alone. Truman blinked up at me from the windowsill like he already knew what I was going to do next. Nothing. I didn't have to do a thing, because Clause 4.3 was doing it for me. And Mason? He wasn't just losing control of the system. He was becoming the case study. January 2nd started like most post-holiday Mondays. Quiet, gray, and vaguely resentful. The snow had turned to slush. The air outside was sharp enough to chew through denim, and my inbox, once filled with system pings and architecture updates, now sat in pristine silence. No alerts, no Slack threads, just peace. Until the doorbell rang. Truman darted under the couch while I shuffled to the door in a hoodie older than some of Arcline's interns. A courier handed me a stiff envelope. Signature required. Certified. The sender? Arcline Systems. Legal Division. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first. Sat down, let the weight of the moment settle. Then I sliced the top clean and pulled out the document, printed on thick paper with that faint corporate smell of toner and desperation. It was a formal request. We respectfully request your cooperation in a limited consultative capacity to assist in the restoration of critical back-end infrastructure at Arcline Systems. Compensation negotiable. They didn't say please, but they also didn't say no. In the corner, stamped in haste, were 3 words: urgent, time sensitive. The letter came with a callback number, a case number, and a brief summary of expected deliverables, one of which was reactivation of the very credential matrix they'd severed live on Zoom 10 days earlier. I didn't reply, not with words anyway. Instead, I opened an archived folder on my private NAS. It was labeled JASA Compliance Lock Kill Switch, because I'd started preparing for Mason's chaos the week he was hired. Inside was an email chain, time-stamped, signed, and indexed. It detailed the original kill switch protocol I had proposed. And most importantly, it included his enthusiastic approval, complete with that smug lowercase sign-off he loved. M. Subject. Credential Isolation Protocol. The email had a PDF attachment. V2.6 Final Implementation Design. In it, the same clause they were now tripping over. Access elevation tokens shall auto-nullify upon host employment hash expiration. Recovery mechanisms are prohibited to preserve compliance traceability. Signed, Mason Locke, CTO. I forwarded that entire thread to Arcline's board legal subcommittee, not Mason, not Ops, not HR. I skipped the chain of command because it no longer applied. My subject line was short. Per your request, please review attached. No commentary, no emotion, just receipts. They didn't need a lecture. They needed a reminder that every trap they'd triggered was one they built and signed themselves. I didn't wait for a thank you. There wouldn't be one. Gratitude wasn't part of the culture Mason curated. Performance was. Optics, swagger over substance, until the substance fought back in code form. The silence afterward was the loudest part. I watched the email read receipt blink green. Someone opened it within 12 minutes. Another hour later, a second certified envelope hit my inbox. This one digital. The language had changed. Urgent request became contractual opportunity. Negotiable became premium compensation. The file name? Independent Contractor Restoration Agreement, Tier 1 Emergency. Still, I didn't respond. They could sweat a little longer. You don't insult the architect, tear down the walls live on camera, and then hand her a hammer and beg her to fix it. Not without admitting you burned the blueprints first. And Mason? Mason's signature was already doing the heavy lifting. He just didn't know his name had become the paper trail. January 10th. Sub-basement level of the Kilmer Building, Legal Room B17, one of those bleak concrete conference rooms that smells like dust and anxiety. No windows, just fluorescent lights that flickered every few minutes like the building itself was judging everyone inside. This wasn't a normal board meeting. No lanyards, no coffee cart, no slide decks, just a long table, 2 security guards at the door, and a folder with my name on it, but not my employee ID. This time, I was listed as Independent Systems Consultant, Gov Liaison Project number 194F, not for Arcline, for their client. I was sitting there on behalf of the one group Arcline couldn't afford to disappoint, the U.S. Department of Infrastructure Logistics, the same group whose $180 million digital infrastructure initiative had gone dark over Christmas because Mason Locke thought swagger was more valuable than stability. Mason was already in the room when I walked in, hoodie traded for a blazer, but still fidgeting with the sleeves like the fabric itched. He didn't look at me, not directly, just kept his gaze fixed on the table, tapping a pen against his knee like he was counting the seconds until he could disappear. Too late for that. The lead attorney, external, not Arcline's usual, opened the meeting with no small talk. "This is an off-record compliance session," she began. "Purpose: review of credential access failures pertaining to active federal systems under SLA 2021-947. Translation: we're not here to talk about your feelings. We're here to figure out if you broke the law." She turned to Mason. "You authorized the deletion of the only credentialed admin account tied to back-end modules governing 3 mission-critical systems under federal protection protocols?" Mason opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "He didn't warn us," he muttered. The attorney didn't blink. "He wrote the documentation. You deleted the access." She slid a printed email across the table. Mason didn't touch it. It was the Credential Isolation Protocol. Clause 7.2, printed in 12-point calibri, right there above his signature. Dated, approved, archived. The other board members, 3 of them, 2 I recognized, 1 I didn't, shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. So the attorney continued. "We've reviewed the logs. The revocation occurred at 12:46 p.m. EST on December 29th. The credential object tied to employment hash CR773A was erased without transitional handoff. This resulted in full credential nullification and triggered non-compliance alerts after an 8.3-hour blackout." She paused, looked around. This failure wasn't a product of sabotage. It was procedural malpractice. You could almost hear Mason's spine crack under the weight of those words. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink in my chair, didn't feel like I had to prove the value of what I built to a room of men who thought cloud first was a personality. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My code had already spoken. The attorney flipped a page. "Miss Randall," she said, turning to me, "your documentation and protocol records match system behavior precisely. We'll be requesting a continuation of your independent oversight per contract terms." I nodded once. No smile, no victory lap, just facts. Beside me, Mason exhaled sharply, the kind of breath someone takes when they realize they're not waking up from the nightmare. The meeting ended shortly after. No announcements, no eye contact, just one final question from the attorney to the board. "Do you wish to pursue internal disciplinary review regarding Mr. Locke's credential decisions? Or shall we prepare the transition recommendation?" Silence. Then a quiet voice. One of the board members, the one I didn't recognize, "Draft the recommendation." That was it. Mason was still breathing, still blinking, but professionally, he was done. The man who deleted me now sat powerless, while the woman he erased dictated the recovery plan for a system he never understood. And the lights? They only came back on because I allowed them to. They never issued a formal apology. No, we were wrong, no public walkback, no grand reinstatement with a welcome balloon arch. That's not how companies like Arcline operate. Too much pride, too many NDAs. What they did instead was far more revealing. They settled. Quietly. I got a call from their new legal liaison 2 days after the board session. Polite. Measured. She never used the word mistake, but you could hear it between the syllables. Offered me a 90-day contract, independent, of course, to oversee recovery, validate system integrity, and supervise credential re-architecture under government audit observation. Triple my old rate. I didn't negotiate. I just sent them my firm's onboarding packet, complete with invoice terms and an absolutely no internal Slack channel access clause. I wasn't interested in rejoining their culture. I was there to fix what they broke. Nothing more. Mason didn't last the week. The official language was transition to pursue new opportunities. The reality? He was gone before the coffee from the compliance review was cold. Someone wiped his name off the internal org chart before the Monday stand-up even started. By the second week of January, the federal client renewed, but not with Arcline, with me. My firm became the new systems integrator of record. We retained control of the back-end modules, credential chains, and compliance logging. Arcline would still handle their shiny front-end tools and press releases. But the spine of the system, the pulse, the protocols, the protection that belonged to me now, no one celebrated publicly. That's not how these things go. There was no LinkedIn post, no lessons learned webinar, just a company-wide legal memo quietly circulated on a Thursday afternoon. It was 9 paragraphs of regulatory fluff and posturing, but one line stood out. Credential deletions must be reviewed for compliance exposure. See root access memo, C. Randall, Des 2023. They didn't bold it, they didn't hyperlink it, but it was there, and every engineer who read it knew exactly what it meant. I didn't gloat. I didn't send smug texts or subtweet screenshots of Mason's Slack. I didn't change my LinkedIn headline or post inspirational quotes about bouncing back. I just did the work, restored what I had built. And when the systems came back online, when heartbeat ping started registering, when Jenkins finally pushed clean, when the data flow lit up the dashboards like Christmas never ended, they all ran through code I wrote, code Mason had deleted, and clauses he had signed. That was the lesson. Not just about me, but about every quiet architect who gets labeled legacy by someone too loud to listen. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you erase, because some accounts don't just disappear. Some accounts take everything with them when they go, and some bring it all back, on their terms.